right. Hello and welcome, everyone. Tanya here with New Earth Consciousness. I'm here with Dave Roberts. I'm really excited to introduce him and get into this interview. So Dave became a parent who experienced the death of a child when his daughter Jeannine died of cancer on March 1st, 2003 at the age of 18. He is a retired addiction professional and an adjunct professor in the Psychology Child Life Department at Utica University in Utica, New York. He teaches psychology classes at Pratt Munson School of Art and Design. He is the host of the Teaching Journeys podcast, which can be found on most podcast platforms. And so he's presented workshops at national conferences. He has been a contributor to the Huffington Post, as well as to Medium, Open to Hope Foundation, Mindfulness and Grief, Thrive Global, and the Recovering the Self Journal. And he has written a book called When the Psychology Professor Met the Minister, which you can see in the ticker streaming across the bottom there. So Dave, welcome, and thanks so much for being here.
Well, Tanya, thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to our conversation since we talked about it. So
Yeah.
I'm ready to go. And as I mentioned, there's no topic that's off limits. So
great. I'm excited too. So let's dive into, we're going to talk about transitioning through loss, which is something that doesn't get talked about often. And we usually kind of go through our life. We were just talking about it before we got on, thinking that if we get to live our best life, we put all our ducks in a row and do all the right things, and we can have the shiny, happy life that our suffering is minimized, right? And it's kind of part of the human drive is to seek pleasure, right? But inevitably, we all do have to face loss of some kind. And so, Dave, I just want to open it up to you. Share with us your story.
Well, my story doesn't begin with Jeannine. Jeannine's the transition of my daughter Jeannine to a new existence really, caused me to really take pause and look at everything in my life, look at my beliefs and my priorities. But prior to that, Tanya, I've danced with grief since I've been 5 years old. The first loss that I experienced was one that actually wasn't related to death, but it was when my father suddenly just left the household, never to be heard from again, and left my mother to raise me as an only child when I was 5 years old. I never heard from my father again. I found out that when I was age 14 that he himself had transitioned. For your listeners and for your viewers, I use the term transition. Other individuals will use death to conceptualize our final physical chapter. Others will use pass away or passed on. I choose to use transition from the physical plane to the spiritual plane. And then from there, it just skyrocketed into other losses. My maternal grandmother, my maternal aunt, who helped my mother raise me. My mother, that transitioned in 1994, when I was 39 years old. And there's pets as well too. I've transitioned 7 pets in my lifetime to Rainbow Bridge. I've had friends that have transitioned from cancer. One of my dear friends and work mentors who taught me everything about dealing with people, building treatment teams, treating clients with addiction with respect. He transitioned from cancer in 1998. But as I mentioned earlier, the event that caused me really to take pause of everything that I stood for, my beliefs, my priorities, my values, was a transition of my daughter, Jeannine, at the age of 18. And she died of transition of a very rare form of cancer called alveolar rhabdomyosarcoma, which was a connective muscle tissue sarcoma. And to give you an idea, when she was diagnosed in May of 2002, sarcoma is only constituted 3 to 4% of newly diagnosed cancers per year, so it was very rare. And in the Utica area where I live, we're more attuned and we have more resources really to deal with like breast cancer and colon cancer and prostate cancer, but sarcomas, they didn't have a clue in terms of of what resources to mobilize. So we got referred to the Dana-Farber Research Institute and Hospital in Boston, one of the best sarcoma research and treatment centers for pediatric sarcomas. Um, we were told that she had a stage 4 cancer with bone marrow and lymph node involvement, and we were also told that there was no cure for her cancer, that the only chance that we were going to have would be to have aggressive chemotherapy, which would put her cancer in remission until they could find a cure. Now, I'm going to backtrack and just give you 3 dates, Tanya, just to show you and your listeners how
Mhm.
life could turn on a dime. On May 2nd, Jeannine had given birth to her first and only child, and my first grandchild, Brianna, who is now 22 years of age. On May 19th, I completed the requirements for my master's in social work degree, culminating a 25-year journey to accomplish that goal. Um, on May 19th, she had a biopsy of her foot, which was highly suggestive for cancer. May 26th, she was diagnosed locally, and June 2nd, in Boston, she was given literally a death sentence because what Jeannine heard, what I heard, what her significant other heard, and what my wife Sherry heard was that unless there is a miracle, your daughter's going to die. And she went through 6 months of aggressive chemotherapy, put her cancer in 80% remission. As you know, with cancer, it's either 100% or bust.
Mm.
And her cancer ended up remetastasizing again after the holidays on February 19th of 2003. And I remember these dates 21 years later. They're ingrained in my memory.
Mhm.
She opted to stop treatment, and we called in hospice services, and she transitioned at home on March 1st, 2003, with her family beside her. And previously, when she was diagnosed, um, I was an addictions counselor and a clinical supervisor at the McPike Addiction Treatment Center, a state-run facility in Utica, New York. And Tony, I was asked this question a couple different times. Did my training as a therapist, did my background educationally and as an MSW prepare
Mhm.
me uh, for the loss of my child? And I can tell you it didn't. I mean, all the training and all the education in the world and all the experience I had working with clients who had their own traumas due to addiction or prior to addiction didn't help me deal with what I had to deal with because there isn't a book in the world that can prepare a parent for burying their child. Our children are supposed to carry the legacies of their parents. It's not the other way around.
Yeah. 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 So when you found yourself in this space of suddenly realizing, like, yeah, I don't know how to navigate this. Um, what did you do? What did you do?
Well, the first, the first 6 months, the first 6 months to a year, it was like the whole thing was very surreal for me.
Yeah.
But within that 6 month period, my wife Sherry had found a support group for bereaved parents that was sponsored by a local funeral home. So the first thing that we did was align ourselves with other parents who had experienced the death of a child or the transition of a child. And these were parents that experienced the death of children, sudden death that could have been suicide.
Mhm.
But we all shared the same bond, which was the pain of losing a child and figuring out how are we going to move forward in our grief without the physical presence of our children. And one
Mhm.
of the things is that I felt terribly alone. My world suddenly became very terrifying and uncertain. At the age of 47, it wasn't your normal midlife crisis. At age 47, I had to look at everything and
Yeah.
say, which of my beliefs stay? Which of my beliefs no longer serve me? What beliefs can I make room for? What are my priorities? How are my priorities shifted? And this is what made the the work of grief even more arduous in the early, not counting the physical fatigue that I felt and the shock and disorientation, but doing the cognitive work to rebuild a world that I that I knew was going to eventually knew was going to be different because of my daughter was not a part of it. So, but getting support was one of the things that helped me because I wasn't alone, and I felt alone because my world had stopped. But once I found that support group, I realized there were other individuals that were going through it, and that our shared pain could become a gateway for help. Then I just started reading whatever I could get my hands on. Other memoirs from bereaved parents who were farther along in the journey than me, to see what they did to help them find peace, to see what coping strategies they used to help them work through grief. And so those two things really helped in the beginning. And then in 2010, 7 years after Jeannine transitioned, everything changed for me. And it all started with a simple intent that I made to the universe.
Wow. That's good to know. I had a client who lost her young son, only age of 3, to murder, actually. And, it's one of those things that I felt totally incapable of being able to help her because I haven't gone through that myself. I felt really at a loss of being able to guide her in any way, except other than to find support groups of people who have gone through that same thing so that she doesn't feel alone, and that what she's feeling, whatever, and I'm sure the emotions are all over the place, that everything that she's feeling is normal. I think one of her biggest difficulties was, interestingly, what she shared with me, a lot of people were kind of wanting her to hurry up and get through it, which I just thought, what? What is wrong with these people? Like, do you have any idea? And yeah, so I can imagine that just to kind of shelter yourself in a way from other people leading so-called normal lives is important. Um, yeah, go ahead. What were you going to say?
No, I was gonna say, just listening to the account of your friend whose child, died as a result of a homicide. One
Yeah.
of the things that we can do as coaches, as spiritual healers, as intuitives, as therapists, is hold space for an individual story to unfold.
Mhm.
Um, what For me, what was important early in grief, and it still is that my daughter is remembered. And for her, I'm
Mm.
sure I want my son to be remembered. So the first thing I always do when I companion somebody who is bereaved, whether it's due to the loss of a child or due to the loss of a spouse or a sibling or a parent, is I want to get to know that person through your eyes. So tell me who your loved one is, and I'll
Mm.
have them bring in a picture. Maybe if they've streamed videos or they have pictures on their phone, I might ask them to email them to me, or if they're uncomfortable with
Mm.
talking about it during the session, to email it to me so that I can take a look at it and reflect back what I saw in those pictures and
Yeah.
see if my observations were correct.
Yeah.
The other thing is that there are causes that are unique specifically to how a person died. Like with murder, it's always a sudden death.
Yeah.
Um, there may be thoughts of getting revenge on the perpetrator,
Mhm.
which is highly normal, even if that person hasn't had a history of violence, because they want to do something to fix what's happened.
Mhm.
Um, they may, so there's a, that they also may need to reconstruct that whole event to provide closure. And if that person, to closure to the event, not to the life.
Yeah.
And if that person is still at large,
Mhm.
their sense of safety, not only due to the loss of their child, which is an unspeakable loss or unthinkable loss for a parent, but their
Mhm.
safety is now compromised because the perpetrator is still at large, and they're thinking, well, geez, are they going to come back after me? Are they going to come back after somebody in my family?
Mm.
Things of that nature. The other thing, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross back in 1969 came up with the stages of grief. And
Mm.
she herself said the stages of grief were meant to give individuals at the end of life an end of life vocabulary. So the emotions that she identified, whether it was denial, whether it was anger, or other aspects such as bargaining,
Mhm.
depression, these were things that were going to help individuals at least come to some form of acceptance that their life in this chapter of their life was going to be over. But many people in Western society extrapolated this to say, okay, this is how we grieve. So they came up with this time limited model that you can grieve for 6 months to a year. After that, you take your grief, you put it in a little box and you bury it. And then you move on with your life as if you move on with your life normally.
Mm.
And I tell individuals two things. One, grief, loss changes the landscape of your universe. When that person is physically absent, your universe changes. The way that you can come to terms with that or acceptance is transform the relationship through establishing continuing bonds. But in early grief, we're so focused on the pain and we're so focused on experiencing the pain and sitting with the pain and getting through it. The transformation of the relationship may come later on down the road once we have sat with that pain and worked through that pain. Um, so And the other thing is that in many cases, the second year is worse than the first year, is more intense.
Mhm.
And there's a reason for that. The first year, and I'll use myself as an example with Jeannine.
Mhm.
I kind of figured, I would wake up one morning, she'd bounce in with her usually lively energy and just say, "Dad, we were just kidding.
Mm.
I'm
Mm.
here." But
Mm.
one year and one day after her angelversary date hit Tanya, I realized that she wasn't coming back.
Yeah.
That this is going to be my life moving forward. And I had to decide, what am I going to do with my life now that my daughter is no longer physically present? So the second year, the surrealness and the pain, yeah, add emptiness to that.
Mm.
The, the second year, because you realize now this is my life moving forward. How am I going to negotiate this? Um, so anybody that has subscribed or wants to get people to subscribe to a linear model of grief, it isn't going to work for a couple different reasons. One, if you take a look at the fact that there's a lot of ups and downs emotionally, you could be feeling good 1 minute, and then the next minute you hear a song on the radio that reminds you of your loved one, and you pull the
Mm.
car over and you're crying your eyes out.
Mhm.
That in and of itself, those types of changes in emotion should deflect the linearity that a lot of individuals apply to grief. Plus, research, excuse me, has shown over and over that people don't grieve in stages. And the fact that we do intense cognitive work that can last, for, anywhere, it could be the average individuals have grief workers have told me is 3 to 5 years before you begin to re-engage and come to acceptance of the fact that this is your world. And your world, this is the world you're going to be living in without the physical presence of your loved ones, but you're making a decision to re-engage in life, find meaning, and commit to service. Now, I don't like to use relative time frames because the average length individuals have said is 3 to 5 years, but people can go through acceptance sooner depending on their history of dealing with other losses, quality of support, and other things. It
Mm.
could be longer.
Mm.
It's just a matter of people will process grief differently. And as long as there's progress, as long as there's movement from the raw pain of grief to a willingness to re-engage in life
Mm.
and help and commit to service and honor your loved one's memory, and
Mm.
it's going to be fine. Time is relative when it comes to that. What we look at is movement. Is there progress?
I see. Yeah. So, and then you said something that, of course, I want to ask is, uh, you said 7 years after
Hmm.
everything changed, something changed.
Yep. Well, the other thing that I was doing in probably early to middle grief, I was doing probably what every parent who'd lost a child has done. And I'm not saying that negatively, but I went to support groups. I started reading, other memoirs of other parents who were farther ahead than me to develop to see what coping skills I could pick up. I also started writing for a couple of online publications. I was also, sponsor. I also was a member of a committee that had in 2010, it was September 17, 2010, we sponsored a one-day workshop where I was involved on a one-day workshop called Beyond Words, exploring creative approaches to grief.
Mm.
And I'm going to backtrack prior to September. On August 25th of 2010, I got a call from a woman by the name of Reverend Patty Farino from Long Island. And there's a story to why she called me. Registration for the conference was online. So she had gotten word of the conference from another bereaved parent, and in Long Island, and Patty wanted to come out. She wanted to go. So she put in her conference information, double checked her credit card, hit the submit button, the computer screen went blank. And so she had to call me. And we realized then if her computer screen hadn't gone blank, none of what I'm going to describe would have ever happened.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she called me. We talked for about 45 minutes. At that time, she was the volunteer coordinator for the Angel of Hope statue in Long Island. And the Angel of Hope is a statue that is erected in honor of children who have died, and parents would congregate there for ceremonies, to say prayers, and to connect. They would, a lot of times parents would sponsor a brick that would be laid out in front of the statue, so they would go, they would communicate with other parents. And Patty was the minister who was responsible for working with those parents. I asked her if she'd lost a child. She said no, but there were two children that were very, very close to her that really, really touched her heart, that had transitioned. And she asked me about Jeannine. So we left it that if you come to the conference and I see you, when you come to the conference and I see you, I'm going to give you a great big bear hug. Sure enough, I saw her. Okay. And gave her a big bear hug, and she hugs me and she says, I think your daughter sent me a rainbow. Now I'm going to backtrack. In the conversation that we had on August 25th, she said, do you believe in signs? And I said, I'm not really into that. I don't really believe in that spiritual aspect because of the fact, I was science-based. My background was in psychology. I believed if I couldn't experience it with my five senses, it didn't exist. But simultaneously, there were things, Tanya, that were going on that I couldn't put my finger on, that I knew science couldn't explain, but I didn't know how to integrate it. Like when I was walking my granddaughter around the block, and her significant other and my granddaughter stayed with us for 4 years after Jeannine had transitioned, and they had all moved in with us when Jeannine got sick. So we were all living together, my wife, me, my two children, other two sons, Dan and Matt, 3 cats, and her significant other, Steve, and my daughter, Jeannine, and granddaughter, Brianna. The running joke was, how many people and animals could you get in a single level ranch? So we tested that with about, I think, 9 total. So I'd be but as I get back, I'd be walking around the block, and this butterfly would seem to be following me around. I'd be thinking of my daughter. I'd hear a song on the radio that we both enjoyed. So there were things that were happening that I couldn't attribute to science, but yet I didn't know where everything fit in. So that's just but I did tell Patty, I said, I think my daughter sent me a rainbow on Father's Day, and this was in 2009. So then when she hugged me and told me, I think I saw a rainbow. I think your daughter sent me a rainbow. That's where we connected. Now, the day after the conference, I'm going to fast forward. It was September 18th. We were taking 3 of the workshop presenters at they were having a very interesting conversation about life, death, the afterlife, very in tune spiritually. We were driving up to a place called Old Forge, and in the fall, if you ever get to upstate New York in the fall is beautiful because of the change of season, the leaves, the colors. So I wanted them to experience a bit of fall in the Adirondack. So they're having this big conversation and about spirituality. All of a sudden, Tanya, I look up at the sky and I said, I want to be where they are. I said that to nobody in particular, the universe, perhaps, God, whoever happened to be listening at the time. I said, I want to be where they are. So that was I stated my intent to the universe. And, when you state your intentions to the universe, and paraphrasing Paulo Coelho and The Alchemist, the universe is going to find a way to conspire to have you get it. So, in the meantime, I had talked. I'm backtrack. I know I'm going back and forth, but I had talked to Patty. When I was talking to Patty, we were having a conversation because a then colleague of ours was putting on a workshop called "Embrace the Power of Change" in November of 2010. And Patty said to me, she goes, "If you ever want to come out there, you can stay with me and my husband, and I'll show you my Long Island." So, also in the car, I had my old BlackBerry phone, and just immediately after I stated my intent, this flyer announcement comes up with the colleague who's doing the Embrace the Power of Change. So I'm thinking, okay, there's another connection that I need to be aware of. So I sat on going for about 2 weeks. Then I called Pat. She said, "Yeah, you can stay with my husband." And I asked her about 300 times if her husband was going to be okay with us staying, because since he had never met me before.
Yeah.
And I said, "Is he going to be okay with some strange guy staying in his house?" And she goes, "He'll be fine with it." And sure enough, after I met him, he was like really laid back, welcoming, open, and he let Patty do what she needed to do with me that weekend. So I got to Long Island, and we went to the conference about 9:30. We came back, and she set me up in her. She goes, "Go get comfortable." She set me up in her meditation room, and from there, there was an entire weekend of being convinced that my daughter's consciousness was alive and well. And after that weekend, it made me realize a lot of different things. But one is that I was doing a great job honoring my daughter, but I was ignoring the other categories of my life. And the messages that I got through that entire weekend were, you're doing a great job, honoring me, but you have a granddaughter, you have my two brothers, you have your wife, you have your teaching. Honor the other categories in your life. To go back to this, on September 3rd, that rainbow that I was telling you about, Patty saw this on September 3rd, 2 weeks before the conference. And she was living in Long Island at the time, but her and her husband did a weekend getaway in New Jersey. And she saw a rainbow that went from one side of Route 17, which is one of the bigger thoroughfares in central New Jersey, one side to the other. And they were just amazed at the brightness and the color. And she sat on the car as she was filming it, and she heard a voice in her head say, "I need you to talk to my father."
Whoa.
And she said, "Well, I'd be glad to, but who's your father?" So it's the guy that you talked to. It's the guy that you talked to about the conference. So this is how this all got set up.
Oh
And from there we had marathon conversations for 10 or more years, and we still do. Not as much as we did the first 10 years, but we still do, and we still have a great relationship and friendship with me, my wife Sherry, her husband Marco, and Patty. And we talked about how psychology. She kept feeding me some information. Take a look at Native American teachings of animals and nature. Take a look at Ted Andrews. Take a look at Jamie Sams. See how this integrates with psychology, with science. And we would talk about a variety of different things. And my curiosity would would take over, and I said, "Yeah, this could work." So, and I would tell her, I said, "Yeah, this could work." I could see where the two sides could marry. So we talked about that. We also talked about the importance of critical thinking. And I had been on her, asking her for about 10 years, we ought to do a book together. We ought to talk about how you help me, what our conversations sprung forth. And she resisted because she's very private. She does not consider what she does as, she doesn't consider herself to be a medium. She rejects that label because she says, what I do is I do because I walk a sacred path and I want to sincerely help others. Not saying that mediums don't do that, but she just didn't want to be tied in with the entertainment side of that.
Right.
And And she said, what I do was, she's an interfaith minister. She got ordained in 1998. She walks a sacred path, and she wants to share her multidimensional view of the universe in a way that's truly going to help individuals, find peace. And that's what she's about. So that's why she rejects kind of like the traditional labels that are attached to somebody with her multidimensional ability to look at the universe. So,
Mm.
um, so from there, she said, "Yep." We wrote the book. We did Google Docs and we got together, collaborated. Sometimes information would be coming through so fast with her, I'd had to record it on a micro cassette and then
Mm.
transcribe it. But in we rolled out the book March 1st, 2021, which was my my daughter's anniversary. It's called When the Psychology Professor Met the Minister, and it's a very short, but we think very powerful and impactful book that has a lot of information with the categories that we talked about. Um, and we hope that for whoever reads it, it resonates. And then the other part of the book, we talked about the details of the spiritually transformative experience that she facilitated that helped me transform the relationship with my daughter, where I now have a continued bond with her and a relationship in spirit with her.
Mhm.
We a sampling of our conversations that showed how psychology and spirituality can help individuals transcend challenge, and the importance of critical thinking for present and younger generations. So, the book is less than 200 pages, but people that have read it and have taken the time to review it have found it to be, very impactful and at least and thought provoking, which is what we wanted. And and I'm very transparent. You'll find everything you need to know about me in that book. There's nothing that I leave unsaid about
Mm.
my journey, about
Yeah.
everything.
So yes, what I'm hearing is, yeah, taking psychology and I guess I'll call it mysticism
Yep.
together. Um, and I'm not a psychologist. I've never went down that path. Um, do you find that, at the university level, like psychology in the universities, they don't talk about this stuff like that at all, do they?
No, not consistently. I mean, I teach a death, dying, and bereavement course at Utica University, and that is a required course for psych child life majors and an elective for other majors. I
Mhm.
also teach a care of the human spirit course, and I'm thankful because at Utica University um, we have the Center for the Institute for the Study of Integrative Health, and so essentially we have a good portion of the university, that sector, the integrative health sector, believes in kind of like, and not kind of, but the the melding or the integration of both science, spiritual practices, holistic practices, metaphysics, everything. So, in the care of the human spirit course that we talk about how science supports spirituality.
Mhm.
We'll talk about I'll introduce them to yoga, to meditation, and we'll talk about what the research indicates in terms of how it improves physical and mental health outcomes. And then more often than not, we see that those holistic practices, such as yoga, such as meditation, such as sound therapy, all of that has 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 positive effects on both our mental and our physical health, whether it's reduction of stress, increasing longevity, reducing anxiety, improving mood, all of that does have an effect.
Yeah. So, my next question is, so one thing that, or one, I guess, affirmation or intention that I often speak is the statement of everything in life is a gift. To
Yep.
you, what is the gift of grief or bereavement and or bereavement?
Wow, that's a good question. At the same time, that's a pretty loaded question too. But it's a good question. For me, um, one of the things in terms of the conversations that I had with Patty, one of the things that I think was a gift for me
Mhm.
is learning that love can exist on the other side. And I think my greater purpose was not only in terms of using my daughter's transition to try to help others, but also to understand that love does exist on the other side. And she proves it to me day in and day out. Um, I don't ask for signs anymore because she's such a part of who I am. And
Yeah.
I've integrated the best parts of who she is into me, and we move forward as a package team together. Um, but she'll still connect. I see a lot of threes and a lot of ones that will come up at very opportune times. But even then, it's just because I've opened myself up to transforming the relationship with her,
Mm-hmm.
I get more and more communication or signs from her. The intention that I stated back in 2010, September 18th, I want to be where they are, is that essentially I wanted a more understanding of how spirituality could help me move through the next phase of my grief.
Mm-hmm.
Because though I was progressing very well, Tanya, that as I thought, my soul obviously needed for something more. It was my soul that was crying out. It wasn't my brain. It was my soul saying, I need more. And then Patty Farino manifested for me and gave me more than I asked for. She did not only give me increased spiritual knowledge, but it was a totally different perspective. One of the things that she talked about, how the moment of death when you're with somebody and
Mm-hmm.
you witness them taking their last breath, how traumatic that is for many and for individuals who witness that. Um, it was traumatic for me because when she transitioned at 12:30 in the morning on March 1st, I was holding her hand and witnessed her last breath.
Mm-hmm.
And leading up to very significant milestone events, such as her birthday, particularly her date of death, I would replay that last moment in my head and with pain. And I told, Patty, I said, I was like the last person that saw her alive. She goes, "What if you looked at it as being the first person who ushered her into her new experience?" And I looked at that and I said, "That's just brilliant in its simplicity." Because looking at it as if and I have come to believe that this is not the end of our existence; that we will go on, and we can have we. I also believe we've lived past lives. I believe our soul has free will to reincarnate, and I've learned this through the work of Brian Weiss, who does a lot of work with past life regression therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that just looking at her moment of death as a moment of true transition into a new existence, it softened her physical absence, softened her physical exit from that world. Um, so I mean, those are the gifts that I've learned. Also, here's another gift.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that I told you that my father left when I was 5 years old,
Yeah.
and early experience matters, Tanya. I mean, and that affected me tremendously. Not having a father,
Yeah.
um, my mother not remarrying, not having a father, a consistent father figure in the home. Although I had two uncles who did serve as father figures and helped me through a lot of tough times.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but through pure serendipity, I had written about my father for a Father's Day article, and he was originally from Baltimore. And a relative who turned out to be my first cousin on my father's side reached out to me. She goes, "I know this is going to sound weird." She sent me an email and said, "I read did your grandparents happen to be Marion and Mary Marion Roberts and Mary Strahler Roberts?" Now, nobody knew that information. I didn't put it in the article. I never put anything about my paternal grandparents in there. So we connected. She gave me his family history. My father could not live in a traditional marriage. His family history was inextricably woven into his DNA. There was a lot of there was mental illness on his side of the family, alcoholism on his side of the family. If you asked for emotional attachment from the men, they would pack up and leave. There was, I believe, also infidelity. And I'm not saying this; it sounds negative, but I'm not saying it negatively.
Right.
This
There's no judgment. It's just is
No,
what it is,
it is
right?
what it is. This gave me context that my father left not because he didn't love me. He left because he did.
Mhm.
And I, with the help of Patty, I was able to see that. And what was interesting is that I was having a conversation with Patty, and all of a sudden my father decided he was going to join the conversation. And Patty had told me, and this is in the book, by the way, um, your father is here, and right now he's very upset. He's very sad that he left you. He's very remorseful about that. And I just said to him, I said, Dad, look, I forgave you a long time ago. I understand why you left.
Mhm.
And I'm hoping that liberated his soul to go on to greater development, greater awareness. Because and Patty had explained it to me, is that sometimes we transition to the other side and we take some unresolved stuff with us that we have to work through at another level of development in the afterlife. And I'm paraphrasing, before we move on. So hopefully that liberated his soul so that he could ascend to greater heights in his new existence. So,
Mhm.
but just understanding context, understanding perspective, the work that she helped me do with Jeannine, transforming that relationship, helped me do the work to transform the relationship with my father and other ancestors that I had unresolved issues with. And Patty also said, avail yourself of many spiritual teachers, and I have, and they have also provided clarity in addition to Patty on in certain areas of my life. And the gift of grief is that I've discovered, for me, it's discovering a whole new perspective, realizing that, um, that I can find that I found peace, and also just being able to learn to transform the relationship with my daughter so that she's here in a different form, and realizing that relationships don't die because the physical body does.
Yeah.
Um, and also, I think my sadness and pain, I think I've accelerated compassion to a new level. I have compassion for people I don't even know now
Yeah.
who have experienced
I was
challenge.
gonna say it must just have experiencing that level of grief just cracks open the heart, right?
Uh-huh.
Where you just it's much wider than maybe what it was before.
Oh, absolutely. And it's just like it opened up a tsunami of compassion for me.
Mm.
Um, my students have become an extension of my extended family, and the Utica University community and students they raised me up when I couldn't raise myself up. And anytime one of my students is going through a tough time with anything,
Yeah.
I am right there with them, because automatically I think of my daughter, and I think of the compassion that the challenges with her transition have opened up for me. um and I also remember that my daughter was very compassionate for those individuals, particularly who are having a tough time, and so I carry that part of her with me as well too. But that just opened up a whole new level of community for me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just your power. I mean, the power in your story. I mean, I just feel it as you're sharing your story. Just felt my body just, vibrating, and the tingles and the emotion that it brings up. It's just such a gift, because I think, um, I think grief can, as difficult as it is, I feel like it can bring us, um, deeper into life, or
Hmm.
um, where it really anchors in that how precious life is, and that really every moment that we have, it's like it's fleeting. So how do you want to live it? I'm sure it wakes you up rather than, I think most people, who haven't had that kind of experience, are just kind of on automatic. Everything is a given, everything is assumed, until it's not anymore. And then suddenly you wake up and yeah, it's kind of a rude awakening, but the blessing is there for sure.
And I was on automatic for a long time. I never even, a lot of parents, would say that their worst fear, and I talked to them, were, losing a child. I never even let myself go there, Tanya. I
Mm.
just kind of had this implicit belief that if I lived a good life, I was kind to women and children and pets, and I was
Mhm.
faithful to my wife, that the universe or God, whoever you believe is your higher power is going to take care of me.
Mhm.
Well, the universe, as I told you, I've said this to you before, said, hold my beer. This is not, this is, here's the plan. And,
Yeah.
and I also think of Sarah McLachlan, a Canadian singer who she's got one song for my father, that when I hear it, I tear up. And it was written for her father who had transitioned, but she had gone through I think several years ago, she went through a divorce from her longtime husband. It was a very acrimonious divorce, from what I understand. Her father, who adopted her, transitioned shortly after. And one of the things I saw she did an interview on CBS, and she goes, you live long enough, you're not going to go through life unscathed. And all the other previous losses that I had, it never even occurred that my daughter would be part of the equation. Never, because
Sure.
I was on automatic even after all the losses that I had. And then once she died, the universe got my attention when she transitioned. Then but what I've learned also, the gift of grief is another gift of grief is that, and we talk about this in the book, is that what do you believe? It's how you can add beliefs in addition to your core beliefs. Adding a new belief doesn't mean you have to eliminate the old. You could take perspectives of different beliefs and incorporate that into your core beliefs to enhance your awareness about your place in the world, and your awareness about yourself.
Yeah. Amazing. Beautiful. So share with the audience, where can they find you? Tell us a little bit about your podcast and any other offerings that you have.
Well, I'm not that hard to find. I'm on, first of all, you saw the website scrolling. It's davidrobertsmsw.com. As far as the book, When the Psychology Professor Met the Minister, you can buy it on Amazon, in Kindle or paperback format. You can reach me through email, and my email address is listed if you go on my website. I'm on social media. I'm on Facebook under Dave Roberts. I'm on Instagram under Dave R 3103. I'm on LinkedIn. So I'm pretty much, my son calls me the world's oldest millennial. So I'm all over the place. And so, but yeah, I'm very easy to reach. I'm open to friend requests from your audience too on Facebook. It just would kind of help if they do that. Maybe just to shoot me a quick message and say, hey, I heard your live stream with Tanya, and I'd like to connect with you. And as far as the podcast, that podcast originated March 31st, 2023, due to the persistence of two very insistent former Utica University students of mine who thought I should do a podcast to take the lessons in the classroom that I put forth with, death, dying, and bereavement, into the podcast world. So about a year later, with the help of my son, who has his own podcast, we launched the Teaching Journeys podcast, and the mantra of the podcast is, we're all students and teachers, so let's learn from each other. The stories feature individuals who have transcended challenge, who are willing to share their stories and share what they've learned to help others. I've had holistic practitioners like you've been on the podcast, and our podcast is going to launch next month. So both on audio and YouTube. And I've had holistic practitioners, integrative health practitioners, individuals from the corporate world who have shared their stories and shared tools that can help individuals transcend their own trauma. So there's a little bit of everybody. It's little for individuals who have transcended loss or other traumas, individuals who have a story or skills, life skills to share, coaches, therapists that can help individuals transcend their own traumas. It's been fun so far. In fact, our 100th episode, Patty and I are doing our 100th episode. That's scheduled to launch middle of December. So, and as far as I'm concerned, as I told you, the universe apparently wants me to continue to do this for as long as I can, because they keep bringing in some really, really outstanding guests like yourself in my path. So, I'm going to keep doing it, and I'm enjoying the conversations too. So it's a lot of fun.
Awesome. So, okay, audience, you heard it. You know where to find Dave. And Dave, thank you really so much for sharing your story. I have a few people in mind that I'm going to send this interview directly to them. And yeah, thank you for being here on the planet and sharing your heart and, trusting your journey.
Well,
And yeah.
well, thank you, Tanya. I enjoy our conversations, and we're gonna have to do a follow up on my podcast as well too. I'm gonna have to have you back. We'll
All
have
right.
to, we'll have to figure that out later. We'll figure out something to talk about, I'm sure.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, for sure. All right, awesome. Well, blessings, everyone. Much love, and see you again soon.
wishing you peace.